Today we're going to talk about distro plates, whether or not they're actually useful or not, because it's one of those. The all-new IQ Link ecosystem for Corsair finally removes all the cable clutter from your PC. IQ Link components synchronize RGB lighting and settings between connected devices with a single wire, creating a chain of devices on a single port via the Link Hub. Take control of your system and ditch the clutter by following the sponsored link in the description below. So my last couple of builds have actually utilized distro plates. These are the ones that came out of the Inwin 925 build that was ultimately taken apart and replaced with Skunkworks, which also has a new mid-plate distro plate in there. They've become really popular over the last 5 years, 6 years or so. And companies like Singularity Computers, who supplied all these distro plates with me, or for me, have really made them popular in kind of designing drop-in replacements, not even replacements, but just drop-in units designed for some of the most popular cases in the world right now. So other big brands that have jumped on that has been like EK Water Blocks, Bits Power, Bikesky, a lot of these other like China brands too, when it comes to like OEMs and ODMs for some of the big brands, have seen the value and benefit to the custom look and kind of the convenience that they can bring to PC building. So like the 011 Dynamic, that is by far one of the most popular cases, if not the most popular case in the world. And you've got multiple distro plate options for that, where EK made one where it replaces the front panel. The ports automatically line up with like where the GPU would be and the CPU would be, making simpler tubing runs. They've got pumps integrated into them. But today we're going to talk about whether or not they're worth the cost. So what are the materials they're made out of? These are all made out of acrylic. As you can see though, they also can get pretty dirty. This is actually just from me accidentally spilling when overfilling, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And the fact that it gets kind of like stuck to the acrylic, depending on the fluid that you're using. I was using the Mystic Fog, which kind of has that cloudy appearance to it. So obviously when it dries, it has a very cloudy appearance. This almost looks like someone sneezed all over it. I've already taken this one apart and cleaned it. The reason why I took this one apart and cleaned it is because you can see right here, distro plates are made up of different materials and thicknesses. And the reason for that, you have the base plate, which is thicker, and then a CNC mill goes and mills these channels in there. Basically, these take the place of a, sorry about the rattling and stuff, it's very windy today and our door's kind of going nuts. But anyway, these are just fancy tubes. That's really all they are. Instead of being a round tube going to a place, it is this more aesthetically pleasing to look at channel to replace the tube. That's all it's designed to do. This particular instance, because it's made for the Inwin 925, gives us a pass-through right here for the GPU cables to come up through and stuff. But ultimately, it's just nothing more than a tube. As you can see, it would go in right here, the coolant, and then just kind of do the zigzag pattern over to here to go back out. That's all it is. But it's interesting to look at. It can kind of give your system a nice, more of an aesthetically pleasing look, where you got a tube in here and a tube out there. You've got these different colored back plates. So Singularity Computers anyway gives you different colored back plates. So this is just a matte black one. There's like gold, there's gray, there's like a mirror finish, there's clear even. So these give you ways to kind of customize the look of your system. Obviously this one has RGB in it, which kind of shines across the distro plate in this one. So as it hits your coolant, it lights up. It's got a really neat effect. So what happens though when it's time to service these? Well, taking it apart can be a little bit scary. Here's one that I've already kind of taken apart. Here's the top piece for it. This was a different distro plate or mid plate for the Inwin 925. It's one that utilized being able to use a vertical mount. So normally you can't use a vertical mount with a distro plate because it has to almost touch the floor. So they have this cutout that's designed for it. But I had used this plate as a cheese plate when I was practicing learning how to drill into acrylic and stuff. Since I ended up not needing it for anything, it was nice to practice and learn on this guy. But here is what the base plate looks like right here. And you can see they've got this kind of a custom made O-ring here that is designed to fit specifically in a channel for this very specific distro plate. So when it comes down to cleaning a mess like this, and I'll do this on video today, sometimes it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt getting this O-ring to sort of line back up in its channel. And not only that, if you don't get the O-ring lined up perfectly, you don't catch the fact that it's not squishing in between the two layers, then you can actually generate a leak, which would be a little bit of a problem. This is a new unused one. What this one has a little bit different is actually a little bit different placement of the port right here. So you can see how this part and this part are different. Otherwise they're the same distro plate. That's just because we weren't sure exactly where my fitting was gonna line up. And if I overlay them, you can kind of see how the ports line up differently there. We weren't entirely sure where the port needed to line up, so we had kind of moved it over and ended up having a spare. But I also want to point out another downside to distro plates is they're almost always made out of clear acrylic. The problem with clear acrylic, it's very, very scratch prone. So this is what this one looks like after some wiping, some cleaning, and general building usage. You can see there are scratches in it. Fortunately, those scratches don't really show up though when you're just looking, when it's built and it's got the RGB going through it and the fluid in there. But it's something that you probably will end up noticing, and you should keep that in mind if you're really, really anal retentive and are like, it needs to be absolutely perfect. So this one, as you can see, has a D5. So your D5 pump, which is actually right over here. Anyway, that just threads down on there and then you've got your pump. So you have a distribution plate, which doubles as a pump reservoir combo. And the problem with something like this versus like a big tube reservoir, very small capacity here. So it can be kind of a pain in the butt turning on your pump, having it pull the fluid down real quick, turning off the pump, putting your squeeze bottle, which you have to fill with something like this. You could technically use a tube with a fitting and have a tube going up to a bigger reservoir just to feed it. The problem is if you end up overfilling that, your system's fully filled and you still have fluid in here, good luck getting that out without dripping and falling down everywhere. That's gonna be nearly impossible. So I always just use the squeeze bottle, push it down in there like that, and then squeeze. So there you go. The cool thing though is if you start getting into the realm of custom stuff, you can get guys like this made right here. This was actually for the SMA8. I didn't use it because I wanted to have actual reservoirs sticking out of the wall. But if I wanted an ultra clean look, I could have gone with something like this, which Singularity Computers made, which is a dual loop, dual pump, back wall distribution plate. So here's how the two loops would work with this guy. So here's your right pump. This is the outlet right here. So you can see the outlet is always on the side. So as the pump spins, it centrifugally, almost like a turbine, turns the water and pushes it out centrifugally so that it goes out the side right there. It pulls in from the middle. So that's what this is. This is the return line. So that would go in back to here. This is your fill port. You can always tell which one's the fill port because it's a little higher. That's because air rises. This is a drain right here. Technically, you could use this as a return as well. However, this makes sense as a drain to get your fluid out or to technically go out to a lower distro plate if you needed it. The second loop right here is just a very tiny version of the same thing. So here's your return line, here's your fill, here's your pump. This is your out right here. This would be kind of a nightmare to fill up just because look at the very small amount of fluid that you have to be able to feed your pump. And if you're trying to fill something like a 560 and a 280 in a lower compartment with a lower distro plate like I had with the SMA8, this could be a pain in the butt. But even though this was designed for the SMA8, I can use this in any build that this will fit in. And I'm gonna be doing a build in the Darkbase Pro 901 soon. I don't think it'll have enough room for this guy, but I'd love to find a system that will allow me to use this and do a dual loop. And then it's just sitting in the box somewhere else right now. It does also have a back piece that goes on there so it's not just completely see-through. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons again. One, the pro, it's just got this custom look to it. It's just a tube. The lower mid panels are typically just a tube. This guy right here, which has a pump, or even this guy, which has a pump attached to it, that now has more purpose because it's actually giving you a place to have your pump and your reservoir kind of combined. And it's a much smaller footprint than having like a big reservoir or something like that sticking out. So this is an EK D5 pump. It's very old and grimy. I haven't used it in years. But as you can see, it's much more lower profile than having something like this sticking up or out of your system when this is like kind of like mounted against the back wall or maybe where 120 fans would go or something like that. Obviously, you can get them in dual pump configurations like this. You can even get them dual pump configuration in the same loop. Sometimes if you have a lot of resistance to overcome, lots of radiators, lots of water blocks, whatever, you might need more than one pump to keep the water flow up where it should be. Some of the downsides are acrylic is very, very easy to scratch. This one's got scratches all over it. I have no doubt this one's gonna have scratches all over it too. And then when it comes time to clean it, although you can do it without having to take it apart, it would be most beneficial to take it apart, because as you can see, if you see in the corner right here where it looks really cloudy, this is where there was always a little bit of an air pocket. You're never gonna be able to get all the air out of the system. I would tilt my system and bleed the air to get this corner filled all the time. A few days later, it would always generate a small bubble right here, just kind of going wee in the corner, which would never bothered me. But as you can see, depending on the type of fluid that you're using, you can get this sort of a buildup in there, which the only way you can get rid of is to take it apart, scrub it, or wipe it down with a microfiber or something like that, which now leads to exposing to maybe over tightening and cracking the acrylic, maybe not getting the O-ring back down in its proper place, leading to a leak, scratching. There's a lot of things, or losing a screw. I mean, there's a lot of screws in here. So with that said, let's go ahead and take this one apart so I can clean it real quick. This one you might be wondering, like, what are these ports right here? This is actually a pump one. So this is identical to this guy right here. So you can see I just got this piece off. And then what happens is these O-rings will align with where they go. That's upside down. And then you just tighten it down. Speaking of something going wrong, let's see if I can clean this now without damaging it. First and foremost, put it on something soft. Even a wood table like this can scratch the back of it pretty easily. I highly recommend just using a screwdriver for this if you are concerned about over tightening or cracking. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm using a 20 volt DeWalt power screwdriver, but that's because I have variable speed with it. And when I'm taking something apart, there's very little chance of damaging it taking it apart. It's when you tighten it back up that there's a problem. So this is just a neat little cover here. Singularity Computers also has different colors of these. So if you went with like a gray on the back, you could go with the gray on the front. It's just a fun little extra, if you will. This guy just pulls out. Now is when we start the monotonous task of taking like 100 screws or whatever out. Now this particular plate, and pretty much all of Singularity Computers plates, use the same length screw everywhere in the perimeter. However, we can't speak for all the brands, so you would want to keep track of where they go, just in case. So once I get all of these out, feels like a pit stop. Like, how fast can I go? I wonder why people lose their screws. I don't understand how people can lose their screws. All right, so now that we're gonna take it apart, it might be stuck a little bit, like the O-ring compresses. This is a square O-ring, it's not a round O-ring. In fact, it might even be an X-channel O-ring, because I feel like there's like a lip on the edges of the O-ring, because the O-rings can be square, round, or even an X. And as you tighten down the X, it does that, it squishes out and gets a pretty tight fit. So when you pull this apart, it might pull the O-ring out with it. So I tend to like to just kind of rock it back and forth. There we go. Now you can see just how gross that is. I wish you could see the look on Phil's face. You can even see the outline of where the internal reservoir part is, because the kind of fluid I was using actually leaves a little bit of a residue behind. Fortunately, that residue just cleans off. In terms of the O-ring as well, you want to be very careful when taking it out. Be careful with that. Don't use alcohol when cleaning the rubber. Alcohol, well, you can use alcohol if it's for you. Like if you consume the alcohol, that's fine. Just don't put it on the rubber. Alcohol will dry out the rubber, and we want the rubber to stay moist. If it doesn't stay moist, then it can dry out, crack, and then you get leaks and stuff. So here's what the bottom looks like. The bottom's not that bad. I didn't get anything really in between the layers. Surface tension. With the two pieces held together, there is a small gap because of the O-ring, especially away from the O-ring. So if you were to spill fluid, it just goes and gets like tensioned and surface tension pulled in, which is what happened on my other piece. So I'm just gonna use a soft microfiber. Microfiber can inherently scratch, so don't push hard. We're just gonna do this very soft and fine. I'm gonna be using just like a general multi-surface cleaner, but I'm not gonna be spraying it directly on the plate. I'm just gonna spray it on the rag, get it damp. And now I'm just gonna sort of softly wipe. Now I wanna go in small circular patterns. Think of like if you were putting wax on a car. Long wipes like that can leave long scratches. So don't want scratches at all, but if we had to choose a type of scratch, I would probably go with the swirl rather than the long scratches, just because of the fact that the long scratches will be really obvious. Now, most distro plates down inside the actual channel part is gonna be rough, and that's from the milling bit. And they don't polish that. There's no reason to. You can even hear the milling like pattern on there. We also want the area around the O-rings to be as clean as possible. Then just flip it over and take the dry part of the rag and just lightly wipe. The rag itself might leave behind a little bit of fibers. If you just flip it over to a dry part of the rag and lightly wipe, the rag will pick the fibers back up. So that's what it looks like now. It's pretty damn clean. So now we need to see how well we can make this thing look. So here's the before, which literally looks like someone has sneezed all over it. I'm gonna use the same technique. Fold my rag into 4s. Spray on the rag. And then just lightly wipe it. Circular patterns. Now you'll notice there's a groove, almost like a pattern where the O-ring has just been contacting the acrylic. You definitely want to try and work that pattern out slowly. And that's the after. So that's one of the benefits to acrylic, is the fact that acrylic doesn't really stain. So if you're using colored fluids and stuff, it's not really gonna pick up any of that color and stain. So now I'm just gonna get these O-rings lined back up in their channel and just kind of tap it as I go around. You might have to stretch the O-ring slightly to get it in there. Once it's in the channel, it'll become pretty obvious, like that one's in. I find it's easiest to, like this one kind of has this little piece right here that sort of sticks down. Let's start with that, because I think that'll be easy as an index to get everything else sort of lined up. And I'll show you how to get the top back on, which can be a complete pain in the butt. But I've got a little bit of a technique that I think helps. And also too, in this particular instance, you'll notice the O-ring is bigger than the channel that it's in. And the reason for that is it gives the O-ring room as you tighten it down to expand and fill out that channel. So it might feel like it's not in there sometimes when it actually is. There we go. So that's perfectly lined up now. Now I'm gonna take this and just softly place it on top. Get all the holes to line up. What I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna just sort of drop like 4 corners down in here for each reservoir. So this one's got 2 sections, right? So that's a separate section from there. So now that I've got that lined up, I'm gonna put another rag on there and I'm just gonna sort of push down like this. Not hard, just softly. The reason why I'm doing that is so that it can't move on me. And then we'll just slowly tighten it to snug. Not fully tight yet, but snug. Now I'm gonna do the same thing on this corner. I wanna point out, my hand is not really pushing down, it's just the weight of my hand on it. Now that I've gotten 2 to start, I wanna make sure my O-ring hasn't jumped out of the channel and I can see that it's still in there. You might look and you might see a little bump in it, which could mean it jumped out of the channel. If you tighten it down when it's out of the channel like that, it could cut the O-ring. Because like I said, that channel does have a recess to it. If the O-ring is on top and it squishes out too far, you can absolutely cut the O-ring. So I'm gonna loosen these down, or tighten these down, loosen these down. So these are all just sort of snug at the moment, but you can see the O-ring is still in its channel completely. So here's a good example. You can see that one that I just tightened. You see the O-ring, how it's squished out? That's because obviously there's no tension farther down without those screws there. So what we're looking for is just enough snug tension, if you will, to get the O-ring to expand, but not so much tension that you crack the acrylic. All right, so there it is, fully assembled and cleaned. There's gonna be maybe some scratches, maybe somewhere, but you won't really notice them once it's all together. But I have a question now that I think we should all answer together, and that is, how tight can we go before the acrylic cracks or you see some damage? So we're gonna test that right now on one of my backup pieces here. Let me find some screws. Who's calling me? Do you know?
Rolling. And action.
All right, so I want to know what happens when you tighten too far. I'm expecting spider cracking around the threads.
Oh wait, hold on. Put it on the black.
Oh.
That'll make the cracks a little more obvious.
Dude, it's stronger than I expected it to be.
I saw it dimpling, like it was bending.
Is that actually more helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
More contrasting.
Ooh. The sounds of that. It's all... Okay. All right, so... Oh, the squeaky sound. Sorry, Phil. So how far... how far can we tighten this until something bad happens?
That is a lot more.
Jesus! I'm gonna actually strip this. Oh. Okay, I started to strip the screw. Okay, it just rounded out that screw. I'm never getting that out.
Well, that's permanent.
I could cut a groove to get it out, but I don't need to. I did take it from the one I just cleaned, so I gotta grab my extra screws now and put that back together. So there's that. Okay,
Frick.
yeah, don't be careful with it. Yep, that is never coming out.
Now it's around.
Well, I just wanted to get the job done. Okay, I guess you don't have to be quite as careful as I thought, but you do if you ever want to get the screw out again. All right, there you go. I've had some questions recently about distro plates and how they work and that, because I've been using them in my builds, and so I just thought I'd make this video giving you guys some info to be able to kind of make the decision for yourself if it's worth it to you. I think when they're designed with a specific case in mind to fill in perfectly certain areas, I think they look absolutely fantastic. But some people don't like it. Some people push back and been like, that looks dumb. Well, then don't do it, okay? If you know it's dumb, don't do it. Is that so hard? Do what we think's dumb, which is probably what you do.